A Single Shard by Linda Sue Park, Chapter 4. In the morning, Tree Ear presented himself at Min's door before the temple bell rang. As he had hoped, it was Min's wife who answered his call. He held out a gourd bowl and bowed his head. "I have brought my own bowl today, so as not to inconvenience the honorable potter's wife," he said. Tree Ear's plan was to eat only half his food, leave the bowl hidden somewhere, and take the other half home to Crane Man at the end of the day. Min's wife nodded and took the bowl from him, but he could see the puzzled look in her eyes. The day before, he had returned the bowl and chopsticks to her after washing and wiping them. Clearly, there had been no need for him to bring his own bowl. Tree Ear turned away, feeling guilt like a shadow across his brow, and hoped fervently that he had not offended her. "I'm not really deceiving anyone," he argued to himself, "and I haven't asked for more food. It should make no difference to her which bowl." He carted clay again for Min, and by mid-afternoon he had grown more accustomed to the work. He was learning the tricky balance of spade work, deep enough to make a clean cut, but not so deep as to bury the spade head in the mire. The work went more quickly now, and the muscles in his back and arms that had been strengthened by the wood cutting did not cry out so loudly anymore. Tree Ear brought the final load of clay back to Min's. As usual, the potter was nowhere in sight at the end of the day, so Tree Ear left the cart parked under the eaves and went to retrieve the remaining half of his midday meal. Tree Ear caught his breath. The gourd bowl was not beneath the paulownia tree where he had left it. He searched the area around the tree. The bowl had been covered with a cloth weighed down by stones. Here was the cloth, snagged on a shrub. And there, a few paces farther into the brush, the bowl. Empty. Not just empty, but polished clean. Some wild animal. Disappointment rose inside Tree Ear until he felt he would have to let it escape in a wolf-like howl. Instead, he picked up the bowl and hurled it as far as he could into the brush. "Aye!" The startled cry that came from somewhere within the overgrown brush frightened Tree Ear half off his feet. Min's wife emerged from behind a tangled bush, holding the bowl in one hand and a basket in the other. The basket was filled with berries, which she had apparently been gathering on the mountainside. She was smiling gently as she handed him the bowl. "This bowl had a great desire to become my hat," she said. "A bowl that flies. Small wonder that you preferred it to my own." Tree Ear could see that she was teasing, but he was too deep in his own embarrassment and disappointment to respond with more than a curt nod. He checked himself in time to turn the nod into a bow of respect, then fled, leaving the scene of his failure, but not the knowledge of it. Yet again, he had failed to share his meal with Crane Man, and on top of that, it seemed that he had nearly hit his master's wife on the head with his bowl. It was 2 full moons now that Tree Ear had been working for Min, but it seemed like a year or even longer. He sometimes felt that he could hardly remember what his life had been like before. The days had acquired a rhythm, a regularity he found comforting and dependable. He woke early, worked for Min, ate half of his dinner, worked again, then returned to the bridge at dusk. In an attempt to discourage wild animals from eating the other half of his food while he worked, Tree Ear had taken to hiding it closer to the house. At a far corner of Min's yard, he had dug a hollow just big enough to hold the bowl and had found a large flat rock nearby to use as a cover. It looked quite unobtrusive, and he had been pleased to find the food untouched the first time he hid it there. Since then, he had been able to bring Crane Man's supper every night. This was his greatest satisfaction. The meals provided by Min's wife were simple, but they never failed to delight his friend, who opened the gourd parcel each evening as if it were a gift of royal jewels. "Bean curd tonight," Crane Man would say, his eyes gleaming, "with cucumber kimchi as well. Truly a felicitous combination. Soft bean curd, crunchy cucumber, bland bean curd, spicy cucumber. That woman is an artist." Several days after he had begun using the new hiding place, Tree Ear made an odd discovery. As usual, he had eaten half his meal at midday. On retrieving the bowl after the day's work, he unwrapped the cloth as he always did to check on the bowl's contents. The bowl was full again. Tree Ear stared in surprise. He looked toward the house, but neither Min nor his wife was in sight. And every evening thereafter, he returned to find the bowl full, with enough supper for both Crane Man and himself. Tree Ear was learning a new skill now, the draining of the clay. It was a tedious process, but one that held his interest. At some distance from the house, near a clear running stream, a series of shallow holes had been dug and lined with several layers of rough grass cloth. The clay was shoveled into one of the pits, and water mixed in to form a thick, viscous mud. Tree Ear stirred and stirred the mixture with a wooden paddle until the clay and water were uniformly combined. Then the sludge was scooped up and poured through a sieve into a neighboring pit. The sieving winnowed out tiny pebbles and other impurities. Finally, the clay was left to settle for a few days until the water at the top either had drained away or could be baled off. Min would squeeze handfuls of the purified clay or rub it between his fingers. He usually did this with his eyes closed, the better to feel it, Tree Ear supposed. He did not ask, for Min preferred to work with as few words as possible. The potter would bark terse commands, which Tree Ear struggled to satisfy by whatever means were available to him, watching Min, watching other potters, experimenting. He did not know why Min did not explain things more fully. Tree Ear's mistakes often cost valuable time or wasted valuable clay. Then Min would shout or scold while Tree Ear stared at his toes in shame, and more often than not, resentment. But since that first day when Tree Ear had damaged the box, Min had never raised a hand against him. Throughout the first few scoldings, Tree Ear had braced himself, ready for the pummeling that would surely follow, like those he had endured when caught raiding a rubbish heap. They had not come, then or ever, even at the height of Min's scorn and rage. The stirring, sieving, settling, and baling were repeated any number of times until Min was satisfied with the residue. It depended on the job at hand. If the clay was for a sturdy teapot to be used every day, a single draining might suffice. But for a finely wrought incense burner commissioned by a wealthy merchant as a gift to the temple, the clay might be drained twice or even 3 times. Clay that passed Min's inspection was formed into a large ball, ready to be thrown on the wheel. The ultimate in drainage work was reserved for the creation of the Celadon glaze. For this, 6 drainings might not be enough. Tree Ear sometimes wanted to cry out and beat his fists into the clay in frustration when Min made an abrupt gesture for yet another repetition of the work. The clay for glaze was mixed in precise proportions with water and wood ash. This combination must have been the result of a happy accident in the distant past. Perhaps ashes had once fallen on a plain glazed vase in the kiln and resulted in patches of the clear celadon color. Now, potters used wood ash deliberately, each with his own secret formula, to produce the sought-after glaze. How proud the potters were of its color! No one had been able to name it satisfactorily, for although it was green, shades of blue and gray and violet whispered beneath it, as in the sea on a cloudy day. Different hues blended into one another where the glaze pooled thickly in the crevices or glossed sheer on the raised surfaces of an incised design. Indeed, a famed Chinese scholar had once named 12 small wonders of the world. 11 of them were Chinese, and the 12th was the color of Korean celadon pottery. The children of Chulpo learned this story almost before they could walk. Tree Ear could feel the difference between the results of a first draining and that of, say, a third. After 3 times through the sieve, the clay was noticeably smoother, with a silky touch as light as feathers. By comparison, the residue of a first draining felt almost gravelly. But once the process had been repeated 3 times, subsequent drainings did not seem to make a difference. At least, not to Tree Ear. He would squeeze his eyes shut, hold his breath, and rub the clay between his fingers, trying desperately to detect whatever was different about a 5th or 6th draining. What was it that Min felt? Why couldn't Tree Ear feel it himself? Min never indicated any satisfaction with Tree Ear's work. He would merely pick up a ball of clay and stalk off with it toward the house. Tree Ear would stay behind to attend to the draining, resigned and envious in the knowledge that Min was taking the clay to the wheel. In the past, keeping his ears open to the talk of village life had always been a crucial skill for Tree Ear. News of a wedding, for example, meant that the bride's family would be preparing much food in the days preceding the ceremony. Their rubbish heap would merit special attention during that time. The birth of a son, the death of a patriarch, these events likewise affected the state of a household's garbage. Of course, none of the villagers thought to tell Tree Ear of such happenings. Instead, he had learned over the years to look for the clues whispered by changes in the villagers' daily routines. Extra bags of rice delivered to one house signaled a coming feast. A normally sober man stumbling home drunk one night might mean that a son had been born. Skipping from one rubbish heap to the next, stopping at nearly every house in the village, listening to snatches of conversation along the road, In these ways, Tree Ear had come to appreciate his lowly status, for people tended to ignore his presence entirely, and on the rare occasions when they did notice him, usually spoke as if he weren't there. He would carry the bits and pieces of news back to Crane Man so they could discuss how such information might lead to a better meal. Crane Man often joked about it. "Tree Ear, again you see the aptness of your name. You are like the ears of a scrawny little tree, noticed by none but hearing all." True enough, and this ability of Tree Ear's was to serve him well in his new life as Min's assistant. 2 months to make one vase. Min, the tortoise potter. The price of one of Min's vases? 2 oxen, a horse, and your firstborn son. It was thus that the other potters, their apprentices, and some of the villagers spoke of Min, usually in jest, but sometimes with derision, just below the thin layer of banter in their voices. Gradually, Tree Ear learned that his master had a reputation for slow work, slow and expensive. Because he worked so slowly, he made far fewer pieces than the other potters, and consequently had to sell each of them at a higher price. Min's work was renowned for its great beauty, but there were not many who could afford it. Tree Ear learned still more without being taught. That Min in his younger days had been one of the most successful potters in Chulpo, but that his insistence on perfection had lost him many a well-paid commission. Buyers grew tired of waiting for work that was finished months after the deadline, and eventually they took their custom elsewhere. True, there were those willing to wait for one of Min's creations, but they grew fewer every year. Beyond all else, what Min needed was a royal commission. The everyday vessels for the king's household, the works of art displayed at the palace and its temples, and most of all, the gifts sent abroad as tokens of peace and respect to the greatest nation in the world, China. These were considered the worthiest of all toil and handsomely rewarded. A royal commission was the dream of all potters, but Tree Ear sensed somehow that it was more than a dream for Min. It was his life's desire. So Tree Ear learned about his master from others, from watching, from breathing the very air of his work, but never by hearing a word from Min himself. The plum trees blossomed, the petals fell like snow, leaving behind tiny green buttons that hid shyly among the leaves. While Tree Ear learned to cut and drain clay, the little buttons swelled and purpled until the ripest fell to the ground, where Crane Man hopped about gathering them, the hem of his tunic tied to make a carry sack. That late summer, Tree Ear and Crane Man always had enough to eat, for the half-empty dinner bowl never failed to become a brimful supper bowl. Tree Ear had once been tempted to eat all of the food at midday, knowing in his heart that the bowl would be refilled. But the very thought had frightened him. How quickly one became greedy! And he knew without asking that Crane Man would disapprove. Taking advantage of the kindness of another, he might say. Instead, Tree Ear pondered long and hard how to thank Min's wife. He felt ashamed that there was so little he could do. On the rare occasions that Min dismissed him early, he would hang around the house, looking for little chores to do, pulling weeds in her vegetable patch or sweeping the yard, and he always made sure to fill the water barrel from the stream before he left for the night. His frustration at the meagerness of his thanks was like the small but constant whine of a gnat in his thoughts. Still, it was a weightless enough worry during as fine a time as Tree Ear could remember. Golden days, warm nights, work to do, and food to eat. And Crane Man often said there was no better finish to a meal than a sweet, ripe plum.